I was halfway through placing roses on my mother's grave when I noticed our bronze nameplates were gone. The cemetery manager turned pale the second he saw me, then whispered, "Ma'am, your husband sold those plots 6 weeks ago." I actually laughed because I thought he had the wrong family. We were supposed to be buried beside my parents. But then he slid the transfer papers across the desk, and my signature was already on them. I never signed anything. My husband was due home in less than an hour, and suddenly I needed to figure out why he was secretly selling our family graves before I discovered what else he'd already buried. The rain had already soaked through my shoes by the time the cemetery manager quietly pulled the office door shut behind me and slid the transfer papers across his desk like he didn't want anyone else seeing them. My mother's section sat just outside the window beneath the cedar trees, except the bronze nameplates beside her grave were gone now, leaving 2 pale, empty rectangles bolted into the stone where mine and Daniel's names used to be. And I couldn't stop staring at them because 22 years of marriage suddenly looked removable. "There has to be some mistake," I said, but even to me my voice sounded thin. The manager avoided eye contact while he adjusted the paperwork into a perfect stack. And that nervous little movement bothered me more than anything else, because people only act that careful when they know something bad is coming. My signature sat near the bottom of the page in blue ink, same looping M, same underline I'd used since college, and for a few ugly seconds I honestly questioned my own memory before I felt anger crawl up my throat. I had never signed those documents. I asked when the transfer happened, and the manager cleared his throat before saying, "About 6 weeks ago," which landed hard because 6 weeks earlier Daniel told me he was spending the weekend in Columbus meeting a supplier for a construction contract he seemed weirdly secretive about. I suddenly remembered him coming home late Sunday night smelling like expensive cologne instead of sawdust, kissing my forehead too quickly before heading straight into the shower while his phone kept vibrating on the bathroom counter. I hadn't thought much about it then, because after 2 decades together, you stop investigating every strange moment your husband gives you. You tell yourself marriage smooths people into habits. Some good, some suspicious, some easier not to look at too closely. The manager slowly turned another page toward me, and that's when I noticed the plots hadn't just been transferred. They'd been separated from my parents' family section entirely. My stomach tightened. "Why would someone request that?" I asked. He hesitated long enough for me to notice the rain tapping harder against the office window before quietly saying, "Usually people do that when they're planning different arrangements." Different arrangements. The phrase sat in my chest like something rotten. My phone buzzed across the desk right then, and the second Daniel's name lit up the screen. The manager looked away so fast it almost felt like guilt. Then my phone buzzed again. A text this time. "I'm running late. Don't wait up." Standing there with forged papers in my hands and our missing nameplates buried under cold rain outside, I realized my husband had sent that exact same text 3 Friday nights in a row. I stared at Daniel's text until the screen dimmed in my hand, then asked the cemetery manager who the plots had been transferred to, and the way his shoulders tightened before he answered made my pulse kick harder. He turned the paperwork slightly toward himself like he was reconsidering how much he should say before finally pointing to a name halfway down the page. Rebecca Hale. I didn't recognize it, which somehow made everything worse because it meant this wasn't some business mistake or distant relative trying to claim property. The manager quietly explained that the new owner had already toured the section twice and requested measurements for updated markers sometime next month. And hearing another woman discuss headstones beside my mother's grave made my skin crawl. I asked if Daniel came alone during those meetings, and the manager hesitated just long enough to answer my question before he actually spoke. No, he said carefully. There was a woman with him both times. Something cold settled into my stomach then because suddenly every late-night supplier dinner, every unexplained hotel charge buried inside our bank statements, every rushed shower after weekend trips started rearranging themselves into something uglier. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was Daniel. It was a fraud alert from our bank asking if I'd attempted to reset the password on our joint savings account 10 minutes earlier. I felt my chest tighten so fast I had to sit down. The manager noticed my face immediately and asked if I was all right. But before I could answer, the office door opened behind me hard enough to make both of us turn. A woman stepped inside, shaking rain off a black umbrella, mid-50s maybe, wearing a cream scarf and carrying a leather folder pressed tightly against her chest. She stopped the second she saw me sitting there with the paperwork spread across the desk, and the color drained from her face so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. For a strange second, nobody moved. Then her eyes landed on Daniel's signature. She whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath and took a small step backward like she'd walked into the wrong room. I stood up so fast my chair scraped across the floor. "You know my husband?" I asked, and the woman looked directly at me with an expression that felt dangerously close to pity. The manager started quietly gathering papers like he suddenly wanted no part of whatever was happening. But the woman opened her folder with trembling hands and pulled out a glossy cemetery brochure with the exact same cedar tree section circled in blue ink. "He told me these plots were for our future," she said softly. My ears started ringing so badly I barely heard the next sentence until she looked down at the paperwork again and frowned. "Wait," she whispered. "Your husband's name is Daniel." I nodded once, and the woman's face went completely pale. "That's impossible," she said. "Richard told me his wife died 4 years ago. You can tell me in the comments where you're watching or listening from right now. I read every message. And if this story is hitting you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next." I barely remember leaving the cemetery after Rebecca said those words, because the entire drive home felt unreal. My windshield wipers smearing rain across the glass, while Daniel's texts kept lighting up my phone one after another. "Where are you? Please answer me. Don't talk to anyone until we figure this out." That last message was the one that finally made my hands stop shaking because people only say, "Figure this out," when they've already destroyed something. I pulled into our driveway just after 7 and immediately noticed the garage light was on even though Daniel never got home before me anymore. My stomach tightened the second I stepped inside because the house smelled like cigarette smoke, and Daniel quit smoking 12 years ago after his father's heart attack. I heard voices somewhere near the kitchen. One male, one Daniel's. I moved quietly past the hallway and froze when I saw a heavy-set man sitting at my dining room table flipping through paperwork while Daniel stood beside him looking paler than I'd ever seen him. The man glanced up first. His expression changed the second he saw me. "Well," he muttered calmly, "there's the wife." Daniel immediately stepped forward too fast. "Mara, go upstairs for a minute." I didn't move. My eyes dropped to the papers spread across the table, and my chest turned cold because I recognized our mortgage statement, our savings account information, and sitting right on top was a thick envelope from my life insurance company. The man leaned back slowly in his chair and tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. "Your husband owes people a lot of money," he said casually, "and he's officially out of things to sell." Daniel snapped at him to shut up, but the damage was already done because suddenly every strange thing over the last year connected all at once. The refinancing pressure, the hidden mail, the cemetery plots, the fake trips, the account alerts, Rebecca. I looked directly at Daniel and quietly asked one question. "Did you change my insurance policy?" He didn't answer right away, and that silence hurt more than screaming ever could. Finally, he admitted he'd borrowed against the policy months earlier trying to cover gambling debts that kept getting worse. But when the lenders demanded more collateral, he started listing assets they could recover if things collapsed. My knees almost gave out when I realized my husband had been discussing my death like paperwork. The man at the table stood up then, buttoned his coat, and calmly told Daniel he had 48 hours left before other people got involved. After the front door slammed shut, the house went completely silent except for the rain hitting the kitchen windows. Daniel started crying before I did. He kept saying he never meant for it to get this far, that he thought one big sports win would fix everything. But I couldn't even hear him anymore because I was staring at the life insurance packet, still sitting on the table with my name printed across the front like a warning. Then I noticed something else. The beneficiary had been changed 3 months ago, not to Daniel, to Rebecca. And suddenly, I realized the woman at the cemetery might not have been part of the betrayal at all. She may have been the next victim.